You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to talk about likes and preferences. Talking about things we like is something we do all the time, whether you're in a meeting, a casual conversation, or just having lunch. There's always a chance to talk about what you like. And sometimes talking about what you like means talking about a preference. By preference, I mean liking one thing more than something else. For example, maybe you want to say you think Sony is better than LG. How can you do that? Well, one way is to just say you prefer Sony to LG. You could also say you're more into Sony, or that you'd take a Sony over an LG. But what if you're talking about doing things? Say you prefer talking to customers instead of sending them emails. In this case, you can say you would rather talk with customers than send them emails. Let's practice using these expressions for talking about preferences. Listen to each example, then repeat it yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
I'd much rather live in Seattle than Boston.
I'm more into French food than Italian.
I prefer magazines to books.
I'd take an iPhone over an Android phone any day.
So, we've practiced different ways of talking about a preference. But what if you're not comparing? I mean, what if you're having a conversation about cars, for example, and you just want to say that you like Toyotas? Well, the easy way is just to say, I like Toyotas. But rather than just using the verb like, you can use adjectives such as keen on, or partial to, or fond of. And don't forget which preposition goes with which adjective. You can say you're keen on Toyotas, but not that you're fond on Toyotas. Let's have a little practice using these expressions to talk about things you like. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
I'm quite keen on the new Samsung monitors.
I'm partial to European wine.
I'm fond of travel and exploring new places.
The Times is one of my favorite newspapers.
As you heard, we can also use one of my favorites to talk about likes. And that's another example of a group of words that you use to express an idea, just like keen on or partial to. One of the tricks to learning natural English is remembering word combinations like this. All right, so we practiced talking about what you like. But what about things you really like? In other words, What about things you love? For starters, you can use that word, love, or even say that there's nothing you love more. You might also say you can't get enough of something, or that you're a huge fan of something. Once again, you might notice these are combinations of words, and you need to remember and practice the entire expression. So, let's give this a try. Remember to repeat each example.
I really love what the marketing department has done.
I can't get enough of Thai food.
I'm a huge fan of the new Nike ads.
There's nothing I love more than a weekend by the sea.
As you can hear, we can use love for all sorts of things, not just people. And in a later lesson, we'll have a look at the opposite feeling as well, things you hate. So, how does all this sound in real life? Let's listen to a short dialogue between two colleagues. One of them wants to know about where the other person is planning to rent an office.
So, are you thinking of renting a new office in London?
No, I'd much rather be somewhere quieter.
Oh yeah? Any place in particular?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Cambridge.
Did you hear how that worked? The second person said that he would much rather be somewhere more quiet than London. And when asked about what city might be preferable, he said he's a huge fan of Cambridge. Not too difficult, right? Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by saying where you would rather work. Then say the name of the place where you'd really like to have your office. Here we go.
So, are you thinking of renting a new office in London? Oh yeah? Any place in particular?
All right. So we've learned some great ways to talk about preferences, as well as things you like and love. In our next lesson, we'll talk about the opposite, things you dislike or hate. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to talk about things you don't like. I'm a pretty positive person, but there are lots of things I just don't like. Getting stuck in traffic, bad customer service, long meetings. I really don't like long meetings, and you're probably the same way. There are things you just don't like, and things you hate. So how do we talk about these things? How do we say we don't really like something? Well, you can say exactly that. I don't like getting stuck in traffic, for example. to say you dislike something, you can just change a positive sentence into a negative one. In the same way, you can say you're not all that fond of something, because being fond of something means liking it. There are even more ways to talk about dislikes. For one, you can say that something isn't really your thing. That's a useful expression if you're talking about a preference. So if you're having a conversation about where to go for lunch, you might say, Greek food isn't really my thing. You could also say, I don't care for Greek food. That's not really about taking care of something. Rather, to not care for just means to not like. Now, how about practicing some of these ideas? We're going to present some examples. After you hear each example, try repeating it yourself. Ready? Let's give it a go.
I don't really like living in a small town.
I'm not all that fond of long meetings.
Sales isn't really my thing.
I don't care for the new TV ads.
So, those expressions are useful for talking about basic dislikes, and we often use them when we're being polite or trying not to make someone feel bad. I mean, sometimes we don't want to sound too negative, right? But then again, sometimes we really don't like something, and we want people to know it. If someone suggests something that you just can't accept, or if you need to really make it clear how you feel, you might need a stronger expression. In this case, you might say you really hate something. Hate is certainly a strong word. In fact, you should be a bit careful with it. Nobody minds if you say you hate getting stuck in traffic. But if you say you hate someone's idea, they might get upset. In that case, it's best to use a softer expression. Other expressions you can use are can't stand or, more simply, really don't like. So, you might say, I can't stand waiting around in airports, or I really don't like waiting around in airports. Those are both pretty strong. There's also another word that is similar to hate, but even stronger, and that word is detest. If you say you detest something, then you really hate it. And for an even stronger statement, you can say you absolutely detest something. For example, I absolutely detest exams. That's about as strong as you can express a dislike without cursing. Now, it's your turn to try using these expressions. Once again, you'll hear some examples. After each example, repeat what you hear. Ready? Let's begin.
I really hate websites that are slow.
I can't stand this new software.
I absolutely detest PowerPoint.
I really don't like public speaking at all.
Okay, so we've done some practice on talking about things you don't like. But There are some things that you don't really think positively or negatively about. For me, that's how I feel about where to go eat lunch. I don't really care. And that's exactly what you can say. I don't really care. You could also say, it's all the same to me. That's useful if a group is trying to make a decision and it's not important to you what they choose. One more useful expression is, I don't mind. If you don't mind something, it means it doesn't bother you. If you ask me whether I hate Android, I'll say, I don't mind it, and by that I mean I don't like or dislike it. It's just okay. Let's practice using some of these expressions for when you neither like or dislike something. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
I don't really care one way or the other.
It's all the same to me.
I don't mind taking the bus to work.
All right, we've been doing some great practice. But how does this sound in the conversation? We're going to hear a short dialogue between two coworkers. They are talking about where to go for lunch.
John suggested we meet at the new cafe on the corner.
Well, I don't really care for that cafe.
All right. So, what about the deli across the street?
Yeah, okay. I don't mind that place.
How did that sound? One possibility is a new cafe on the corner, but the lady doesn't really care for that cafe. However, she doesn't mind the deli across the street. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the woman's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by saying you don't care for the cafe. Then you'll say that you don't mind the deli. Here we go.
John suggested we meet at the new cafe on the corner. All right. So, what about the deli across the street?
All right. So we've learned some great ways to talk about things you don't like, as well as things you hate, and things you don't really care about. In our next lesson, we'll move on to look at how to talk about your ideas and make suggestions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to talk about abilities. There are lots of opportunities at work to talk about your abilities. And I don't just mean job interviews. That's an obvious one. But there's also work planning, project meetings, and just discussing who should do what on a daily basis. I mean, you're not going to ask the person who doesn't have the ability to type to prepare that big report, right? The simplest way to talk about basic abilities is using the words can and be able to. So, you might say, I can type 60 words a minute. Or, I am able to type 60 words a minute. It's that simple. How about a bit of practice talking about basic abilities? Let's try some examples. Listen to each sentence. Then, repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
I can use the full Microsoft Office suite.
Harriet is able to speak Japanese fairly well.
I'm pretty good at presentations and public speaking.
As you just practiced, you can also say you are good at something, such as presenting or bookkeeping. That means you have the ability in that area. But what if you're really good at something? What if your ability isn't basic, but advanced? In that case, you have a few options. You can say you excel at something, which means you're not just good at it, but excellent at it. Or you can say that some ability is your greatest strength. That expression might be especially useful in a job interview. Let's give these expressions a try. This time, you're talking about things you're very good at. Once again, you're going to repeat the examples after you hear them.